The door was already open when I arrived. Not because anyone was expecting me. Because my mother-in-law never closed it all the way when she was hosting. She liked people to walk in and find her already perfect. Already arranged. Already the center of whatever room she stood in. The house smelled like catered food and expensive candles. And somewhere near the back, I could hear my husband laughing at something his brother said. I stood in the entryway for a moment with a bottle of wine I'd brought, knowing it would be set aside without comment, and reminded myself why I'd come. My husband had asked me to. That was the only reason I was here. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I have a master's degree in structural engineering, and I've spent the last 6 years working on infrastructure projects across the country: bridges, tunnels, load-bearing assessments for buildings that thousands of people walk through every day without thinking about whether the floor beneath them will hold. I think about it. That's my job. I make sure it holds. Prostit. My mother-in-law, Diane, had a different way of describing what I did. She called it playing with blueprints. She said it at a dinner 2 years ago, laughing lightly like it was a joke. And when no one corrected her, it became the version of me that existed in this house. Blueprint girl. The one who draws things. Isn't that sweet? My husband, Tom, never corrected her either. I used to tell myself it was because he didn't want to start a fight. I'd been telling myself that for a long time. The party was for Diane's 65th birthday. She'd rented a ballroom at the Harrington Hotel downtown. But the pre-party gathering was here, at the house, for family and close friends. About 40 people, moving between the living room and the back patio. Servers in white shirts carrying glasses of champagne on trays. Tom found me near the door and kissed my cheek. "You made it," he said, like I'd traveled a great distance. I lived 20 minutes away. I'd driven myself because he'd come early to help set up. "I made it," I said. He took my coat and disappeared with it. And I stood at the edge of the room feeling exactly the way I always felt in this house. Present but not visible. There but not counted. Diane swept over within minutes. Which I gave her credit for at least. She acknowledged me immediately. Even if the acknowledgement was its own kind of erasure. She was wearing a deep green dress and her hair was done in the way she always did it for events. And she looked genuinely beautiful in the way that women who've spent decades curating an image sometimes do. "Claire," she said, and kissed the air near both my cheeks. "I'm so glad you could fit this in around your little projects." Little projects. There it was. I was currently the lead structural engineer on a renovation assessment for the Caldwell Center, a performing arts building in the city that had been flagging a foundational issue for 2 years. It wasn't a little project. It was the kind of work that, if done wrong, eventually made headlines. But I smiled and said it had been no trouble at all. Wonderful. She was already scanning the room behind me. "Oh. And would you mind? Marcus was supposed to bring out the cheese display from the kitchen, but he's been pulled into something. You don't mind, do you? You know where the kitchen is." I knew where the kitchen was. I stood there for a moment after she walked away, holding the stillness of that moment inside me like something I was trying not to drop. She had just asked me, the only engineer in the room, to carry a cheese board. And she'd done it the way people ask for very small favors, the assumption buried so deep in the request that pointing it out would make me the unreasonable one. I went to the kitchen. I carried the cheese board out. A server took it from me at the door to the dining room without making eye contact. Which was, in its own way, Amerzi, Tom's brother. Derek found me near the bookshelf a little while later. Derek was 3 years younger than Tom, worked in finance, and had the specific confidence of someone who had never once doubted that rooms were built for him. "How's the blueprint stuff going?" he asked. He was holding a beer and looking mostly at the patio. "Structural engineering," I said. "It's going well." "Cool." Cool. He nodded slowly. Tom said, "You've been really busy." That's good. Keeping occupied. He said it like keeping occupied was the goal of a hobby, not a career that paid for half our mortgage. I excused myself and found a corner near the window. I want to be clear about something. I am not a woman who needs constant validation. I don't require applause. I chose a field that is largely invisible when the work is done correctly. No one thinks about it. Buildings stand. Bridges hold. That's the point. I made peace a long time ago with the fact that most people don't understand what I do. And that's fine. What wore me down wasn't the ignorance. It was the replacement. In the absence of knowing who I actually was, this family had built a version of me they found more comfortable, a pleasant girl who drew floor plans and came to parties and didn't demand to be taken seriously. And they'd installed that version so firmly that correcting it now felt like an accusation. Like I was the one making things difficult by insisting on being real. Tom came to find me around 7:30. The party was starting to move toward the hotel, and people were gathering their things, calling cars. The particular organized chaos of a group departure. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine." He looked at me for a moment. And I think he knew. He'd always known. On some level. But knowing and doing something about it are different rooms. And Tom had been standing in the hallway between them for 6 years. The Harrington Hotel ballroom was everything Diane had wanted it to be. Round tables with white linens. Centerpieces with white flowers and gold accents. A string quartet in the corner, playing something I recognized but couldn't name. About 120 guests. The kind of event where the invitation list said something about who you were and who you knew. I found our table. We were seated with Derek and his girlfriend. And 2 couples I barely knew, and I settled in for an evening of being politely unremarkable. I was good at it by now. I could hold a conversation, laugh at the right moments, ask questions that made other people feel interesting. It is its own skill. Disappearing in plain sight. The dinner moved along. Speeches were given. Diane cried gracefully. There was a cake the size of a small table. I was somewhere between the main course and dessert when I noticed the man at the table near the window. He was in his late 60s. I guessed. With the kind of posture that doesn't come from yoga classes, but from somewhere deeper habit. Probably. Or whatever it is that gets pressed into you when you've spent years being responsible for other people's lives. He was talking to the couple beside him. And there was something about the way the people around him oriented themselves toward him. Subtle, but consistent. That told me he was someone others deferred to without being asked. I didn't know who he was. I turned back to my table. 20 minutes later, I heard the sound. It wasn't dramatic. It was actually very quiet. A short exhale, the scrape of a chair, and then a kind of silence that spread outward from one table like a stone dropped in still water. By the time I turned, a woman near the far side of the room had slipped from her chair and was on the floor. And the people around her were frozen, in the specific paralysis of people who don't know what to do and are hoping someone else does. I was already standing. I don't think about it when it happens. There was a period in my late 20s when I took an extended first aid and emergency response certification, not for any professional reason, but because I'd been on site at a construction accident and stood there useless while someone else handled it. And I'd promised myself it would never happen again. I'd kept that certification current every 2 years since I crossed the room. Someone said, "Should we call?" And I said yes. Call 911 now. And tell them she's unconscious and not responding. I was already kneeling. Her airway was clear. No pulse. I started compressions. The room had gone very quiet. I counted. I kept counting. Someone materialized beside me, a young man who said he knew CPR, and I directed him to take over when I needed a break and told him exactly what to do and at what rate. And he followed without questioning me, which was the right call. A few people had stepped back. A few were on their phones. Diane was standing somewhere behind me. I was aware of her in the peripheral. Not looking at her. About 3 minutes in. The woman gasped. It's not like it looks in movies. It's not a clean, dramatic inhale. It's rough and uneven, and it sounds like something mechanical restarting. But she was breathing. She grabbed weakly at my wrist, and I told her to stay still and keep breathing, and that help was coming. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes later. I gave them a full report duration of unconsciousness, rate of compressions, response timeline, and they took over. One of them looked at me and said, "Good work," in the way medical professionals say it when they mean it. I stood up. My knees ached. I was aware that my dress had a smudge on it from the floor. I was aware that the entire room was looking at me. Tom was standing near our table with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Derek was next to him. Diane was a few feet away. Very still. I wasn't looking at any of them. I was looking at my hands, making sure they'd stopped shaking, which was purely mechanical and had nothing to do with the people in the room. "That was you." The voice came from my left. I turned. The man from the table by the window was standing a few feet away. Up close. He was taller than I'd registered. He was looking at me with an expression that was not surprise, exactly more like recognition. "I'm sorry," I said. "The Caldwell Center assessment," he said. "The load-bearing report on the East Foundation. That was your team." I looked at him. "Yes," I said slowly. "I'm the lead on that project." He nodded once. "I'm Richard Hargrove," he said. "I'm on the board of directors for the Caldwell Foundation. We've been reviewing your team's report for the last 3 weeks. He paused. "It's the most thorough structural analysis we've received in 22 years of operating that building. You found a failure point that 2 previous firms missed entirely, and for you why." I didn't say anything. "If that failure point had gone unaddressed another 18 months, he said, "we would have been looking at a partial ceiling collapse in the East Wing during a live performance." He said it plainly. The way people say true things. You prevented what could have been a catastrophic event. The room was very quiet. Not the party quiet of polite conversation, but the real quiet of people listening. "And now this," he said, with a slight gesture toward the space where the woman had been on the floor. She was on a stretcher now, moving toward the exit. "Stabler. I've been sitting 30 feet away watching you work for the last 8 minutes. He shook his head slightly. "You want to tell me your name? So I know who to call on Monday, Claire." I said, "Claire Merritt." He extended his hand. I shook it. "The foundation is going to want to speak with you directly," he said. "We've been trying to identify the right firm for the full renovation contract. After tonight, I don't think I need to look any further." I heard something behind me. A small sound. Barely anything. I didn't turn around. Richard Hargrove held my hand for a moment longer than a standard handshake, the way people do when they're emphasizing something. And then he said, "Thank you. For both things." Then he stepped away to speak with someone near the door. And I was left standing in the center of the room with about 120 people looking at me. And I took one slow breath. And then another. I turned around. Tom was looking at me with an expression I still didn't have a word for. Derek had stopped looking at his phone. And Diane was standing exactly where she'd been. Very composed. Very still. In her beautiful green dress. And there was something in her face that I recognized because I had spent 6 years watching her arrange her expressions before they reached the surface. She was recalculating. I watched her do it. I watched her locate the version of me she'd built and find that it no longer fit what was standing in front of her. And I watched her try to find a way to absorb tonight into the existing story. And I watched her realize, maybe for the first time, that the existing story had never been accurate. She started to say something. I saw her lips part. I picked up my clutch from our table. I'm going to check on the woman they took out. I said to no one in particular, and then I'm going to head home. I have an early call Monday morning. Tom said my name. Just my name. With a whole question inside it. Drive safe. I said. I walked out of the ballroom through the door. I'd come in. And the string quartet had started playing again. Something slow and settled. Like music played for people who've already made their decisions. And I walked through the lobby and out into the night air and didn't stop. I'm not going to tell you I felt triumphant. That's not the right word for it. Triumph belongs to people who were fighting for something. I wasn't fighting. I was just working. I had been the whole time, and the evening had simply arranged itself in a way that made what I already knew visible to people who hadn't been paying attention. The Caldwell Foundation called on Monday. As Richard Hargrove had said they would. The contract is the largest my firm has ever handled. I told my manager it came from a referral at a private event. Which is true. Tom and I had a long conversation the following weekend. Several long conversations. Actually. Over the course of 2 weeks. I won't detail them here because they're ours. But I will say that something shifted in those conversations, not fixed. Not resolved. But shifted. The way a structure can be restabilized if you address the foundational problem honestly instead of covering it with more material and hoping it holds. He said he was sorry. I believe he meant it. I told him sorry was a beginning, not an end. Diane called me the Thursday after the party. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was gracious in the specific way of someone who is unaccustomed to apology and is attempting it anyway. Which I found more genuine than if it had come easily. I haven't returned the call yet. I'm not sure I need to. What I know is this. I've spent 6 years making myself smaller in rooms that were made smaller for me. I told myself it was patience. Maturity. Choosing my battles. And some of it was also the slow erosion that happens when the people closest to you consistently reflect back a version of you that doesn't match what you know to be true. And you begin, in small ways, to defer to their reflection instead of your own. I'm done deferring, not with anger, not with a speech or a declaration, just with the quiet, final knowledge of a load-bearing wall that has been tested and has held and knows now, with certainty, exactly what it can carry. The buildings I work on will stand long after I'm gone. The people who walk through them will never know my name. That's fine. That has always been fine. It was never about being known by everyone. It was about being known by the people who mattered. And where that wasn't possible, it was about knowing myself well enough to walk out of the room and not look back. The door was open when I arrived that night. I closed it on my way out.